Good evening, council. Please come to.
No, mine's on.
There we go.
Almighty God, we ask for your blessing upon the members of this council as we assemble here in this chamber to conduct the ongoing business of our city. With your guidance, we will strive to ensure that all our decisions are for the common good, and your inspiration will instill respect, compassion, and thoughtfulness in all our deliberations. Give us the strength and wisdom to lead by example as the people's representatives, and that peace and harmony will mark all our proceedings, and keep us faithful to the trust placed in us by the citizens of your community. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah, Alderman Singh, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
No problems.
Excuse me, before we start that, and my apologies, I was going to ask for a moment of silence in memory of Reverend Greg Perry, please, who passed away, was very beautifully remembered during the Martin Luther King March programs on a Monday as well, but I think we should do that in his memory. Thank you. Thank you. I declare Citizen Comment General to be open and invite anyone wishing to address us on any issue, particularly not on an agenda this evening. Please approach the microphone with your name and address for the public record. Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak under Citizen Comment General? Anyone wishing to speak under Citizen Comment General? Anyone wishing to speak under Citizen Comment General? Seeing no one, I declare it closed. Thank you.
Petitions and communications will be continued to the February 5th meeting.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. In lieu of reading my a written report, I'm submitting that to you for your reading at another time. Tonight, I'd like to give a brief overview of the flooding incident that we had on January 10th and then continuing into January 13th. There are really three brief parts to my report. What led up to the flood was heavy rains that exceeded major flood status and were actually measured in feet to 14.2 or 14.2 feet. Now, to put that in perspective, the record flood for the city occurred in 1982 and was close behind by the flood of 1938 with the New England hurricane, and they were at 14.9. So you can see that there wasn't much of a difference between the 14.2 and the 14.9. So this was a heavy rainfall event. And what exacerbated it, of course, is that we've had persistent rains all during the month of December and into January. So the ground was totally saturated and could not absorb any of the water. Now, I have, Tracy Montoya will come up right now and give a few-minute presentation on what went on in the EOC and some facts that led up to the flood. Do you want to come up to the dais?
Good evening, Tracy Montoya, Norwich Fire Chief, Emergency Management Director. So I was asked to speak this evening regarding the timeline of the EOC, some of the actions we took, some of the factors we used in taking those actions, as well as next steps forward. So I'll start with the 9th. We had a weather update from DEMIS. We had a city meeting, and then we did another meeting with DEMIS. And we determined that on the 9th, based on the forecast for the 10th, excuse me, that the EOC would be on standby but not activated at that point. The forecast for the 10th, as the city manager mentioned, was for heavy rains and a flood stage forecasted to hit 10.6 feet,
Yeah.
I think, was the
Much
original
below
forecast.
what actually happened.
And as we all know, the actual weather and the river gauge exceeded that by 4 feet. So all the weather mapping programs and the different things that the state used did not prepare us for that. So we had near record flooding on the Yannick and the flood zones of 14.23 feet, which was compounded by concerns over the Fitchfield Dam. So early in the morning, I'm going to say, I'd have to look at my phone to be sure, but I'm going to say about 4:45, I spoke with Mike Caplet, who is the Region 4 coordinator for DEMIS, regarding the Fitchfield Dam. Yannick at that point had been running calls for probably about an hour and a half at that point, and I also communicated with the on-duty battalion chief. We recognized the potential for evacuating neighborhoods. So a little bit after 5, I made some text messages and some phone calls to have the city manager be on board with activating the EOC. Communicated with NPU, who, as you know, is the host of the EOC, and various agencies, Public Works, fire groups, Red Cross, Human Services, to get the EOC activated, shooting for a goal time of 7 o'clock. Prior to that, I responded in the field and met up with Chief Hers from Yannick, who was on scene on West Town Street. That seemed to be the focal point of the problem areas. It certainly wasn't the only one, but that's where the fire service had a big presence. So I met with him, well en route, communicated with Mike Caplet, and he ended up meeting me on scene. We talked with Chief Hers about the potential evacuation and what neighborhoods would be impacted, as well as the information that was still growing at the time of the concerns over the Fitchfield Dam. So the EOC was probably, I don't have the timeline exactly in front of me, but I'm going to say around 7:10, 7:12 was formally activated. I made it there shortly after that. We had staff from Public Utilities, Public Works, the Police Department, Dispatch, make sure I'm not missing anyone, Red Cross, city manager, and myself there, as well as a liaison for the fire groups. DEMIS had been in touch with DEEP, who had contacted the DEEP Dam safety representative, who was on his way to the Fitchfield site. Hadn't arrived yet at that point, but he had an ETA, I want to say around 8 o'clock, and he ended up showing just shortly after that. So we were basing our decisions on the NOAA forecasting for the max river height, and again, we had already exceeded that, or we're getting close to it at that point in the morning. And then we were waiting to hear input from the engineers from DEEP. After Chuck Lee, if you've seen him on the press conferences or heard his name thrown about, he was the DEEP representative for the dam safety team that showed up at Fitchville, and he was our first point of contact with an engineer with eyes on the actual site. We touched base with him probably about 20 minutes after his arrival, and in his words, the scene had only gotten worse since he had been there. So based on that information, the continued rainfall and the forecast for a climbing river peak at that point, the decision was made to declare an emergency, local emergency, and to establish an evacuation plan. We worked with DEMIS Region 4 Coordinator Mike Caplet. His points of contact at Everbridge and the state emergency notification cadre, if you will. They used WIA, which I think is the first time that we have used it in the city of Norwich, to my knowledge. It's the wireless emergency alert system. And if you're familiar with Everbridge, if you have any Everbridge messages, WIA uses Everbridge as a system, and what the system allows is the drawing of a circle, a shape, a polygon, if you will, and then the system will message every cell phone within that shape that you've drawn on the map. So lessons learned, it took us a little bit to draw that shape. The GIS folks at NPU were very helpful and essential in that process. They drew the shape, if you will, on the map based on the projected 100-year flood and 500-year flood zones on the city. So they used that as a basis. We took that map and we forwarded it to our point of contact at DEMIS, and he kind of drew a less defined but more robust polygon for us to use. It was agreed upon, our language was agreed upon, and then that message was sent out. In addition to it being sent out via the state system, the WIA, NPU also used their code red notification system, which in their database of customer accounts allows them to send email, phone call, and text messages to the same people. They used the same polygon that we used for the state messaging. So kind of just a double tap there of making sure that the word got out. That was a mandatory evacuation order for areas from the Basra town line to the harbor along the corridor, if you will, of the Yannick River, if you've seen that shape. That was done after much consultation and out of a abundance precaution, because there is no playbook. We didn't have an inundation map on the dam if the dam were to fail. The owner was asked for one a couple years ago by the state and didn't provide one. So we had no idea what would happen if the actual failure of the dam occurred. So we drew that polygon again, and just out of an abundance of caution to get people notified. Red Cross had a crew on standby at Kelly Middle School. As soon as the evacuation order was given, they were ready to stand up the shelter. Over the course of the day, I think we ended up with just under 20 occupants, as well as a handful of pets. I don't know the number on the pets. Let me think. So that's that timeline. As the day went on, DEEP kind of commandeered the site, I guess is the best way to put it. You know, it's private property, but obviously there's a public safety concern there. So DEEP took over and coordinated with a engineering group, Fuss and O'Neill, to come in and get some work products done on there to kind of show us what would happen if we did have a failure of the dam. That's not a quick process. We didn't have it that day. We didn't have it for a couple days, actually. But the weather started to subside. We watched the peak. And as the city manager said, the evacuation order wasn't given because of the flooding, even though it was near historic flooding in Yannick and the other areas affected. It was given over concern of the dam. Pardon me. Let me just look through this timeline.
And I will just interrupt for a second. And that was one of the things we found to be a problem. Most people that live in that area of the Yantic River know when it floods and are familiar with what they need to do. And so they were wondering why we were actually doing an evacuation, because normally we don't do that. People go out under their own purview, but they don't necessarily get a mandated evacuation order. It was, as the chief says, because of the potential failure of the dam, which could have placed waters at the 500-year flood level or above, and also have volume issues, the speed of the water cascading down the river had the potential to move structures, things like that. So we kind of had to straighten that out because a lot of people didn't want to leave because they said, I don't need to leave, I can weather the flood. But if this would have happened, it wouldn't have been an ordinary flood. And that's the reason that we did the evacuation.
Yes, sir. And along those lines, the dispatch center, the firehouses, public works, public utilities, my cell phone, we all received just a ton of calls with questions from the community. Asking, I live on this street, this is my house number, do I need to evacuate? So if you can imagine that, and I understand the concern. We were in drafting the language for the evacuation order. We went back and forth a few times because we wanted to convey the seriousness of the situation, but not incite panic necessarily. But we also didn't want people, as a city manager, to say, well, this is a normal flooding issue and I pumped my basement out and I'm fine. It wasn't that scenario at all. There was much greater potential. So that was one of the lessons learned there is, again, first time with my experience anyway, that we've used the WIA system in the city. It took, I'm going to guess, probably around 25, 30 minutes from when the decision was made to get that message out. The bulk of that time was spent when we were drawing the shape for the release of the message. Really drafting the language was fairly quick. We had great support from Public Utilities and their PIO, Chris Riley. So the lessons learned there is we have draft language now. We have draft language for an evacuation, for a precautionary evacuation, for a rescinding of evacuation. And we also have a pretty decent polygon. I think we'll refine it a little bit once we have some more time to review the products from the engineers, but we have a decent polygon. So that's where we stood for the storm. Let me backtrack a little bit. I just see something in my notes. In the morning, around 8 o'clock that morning, so shortly after the EOC opened, again, having Mike Caplet, the regional coordinator there, was a tremendous resource. Through the state, we had the state police dive team and swift water rescue team pre-staged in Norwich. So they were in the armory up in the industrial park. We had looked at some alternative sites for them, but that's high ground, as you can imagine. Kind of limited response directions from the industrial park, but a good spot for them. So we staged them there throughout the day on the 10th. And then once we were getting ready to rescind the order, we released them. So that was a good resource at our fingertips. Typically, they are in Brainerd Airport. The state, they're co-located with the USAR team. And my understanding after speaking with their supervisors, if they were in quarters, it would be about a 90-minute response time. So it was nice to have them right up the road, literally 5 minutes from anything we would need in Norwich. So towards the end of the afternoon, based on evaluations at the site from both DEEP and engineers on site, conferring with the DEMIS weather forecasters and what we were looking at for the remainder of the night, 1600, the evacuation order was rescinded. The shelter was closed, and we kind of left it at that. We did have one family that continues to be displaced and assisted by Red Cross, and now I think they're getting FEMA assistance as well. But overall, a pretty successful operation shelter-wise and response-wise. No injuries that were reported civilian-wise nor firefighter-wise to the EOC at least. And let me think. The end of the afternoon brought with us a forecast for the weekend. So while we were happy things were winding down on Wednesday afternoon, we knew the strong possibility that we would be back there Friday night, Saturday morning. So while we took advantage at the city manager's request, the NWS, the National Weather Service rep from DEMIS, gave us a briefing that afternoon before we closed the EOC, just to give us an idea of what to expect for the coming days. And based on that, we knew that on Friday we'd be meeting again, talking about things, and which we did. So I'll bounce into Friday, the 12th. to kind of the same battle rhythm. We had our Demas meetings, we had our city meeting, we had a meeting in city manager's office at 11:30 that morning. Went for a few hours planning. We had the PIO from NPU there. We drafted language for what we deemed an informational message. We knew based on the forecast, the timing of the storm, that if we had to do an evacuation at the peak of the storm, it would be very difficult. The storm was scheduled to hit between 02 and 03 in the morning, so we knew that we would have a hard time getting responses to an evacuation order. So it was decided to send out an informational message that afternoon. That informational message, again, very careful crafting of the language, so not to let people dismiss it, but not also to panic people. But even that message brought an onslaught of phone calls to dispatch, to the fire service, to the firehouses, and everywhere else. The gist of that message was for people to be prepared and to monitor, and to maybe, if you normally turn your cell phone off at night before you go to bed, that you leave it on, so that way you have the ability to receive these messages. We had planned, again, based on the forecast and what we knew at that point, to open the EOC at 0500 on Saturday morning. EOC was fully staffed on Saturday morning at 5. We had a couple more participants that we didn't have on Wednesday's activation. We had the Hartford Healthcare American Ambulance representative. We had Red Cross again, and we also had additional fire department liaisons. The forecast when we ended that meeting on Friday afternoon was really up in the air. There was a range of between 2 and 3 inches of rainfall that had significant impact on the total river rise. At 2 inches, it was manageable in the minor to moderate. I don't even know that it hit moderate. In the 2.5 inches, it fell in the moderate range. If it hit 3 inches, just a half inch more of rainfall, we would have matched the river level that we had on Wednesday, which, with the saturated ground and everything else, there was a lot of concern. Public utilities concerned about utility poles because the ground was so saturated. They had gone out and tamped things down and reinforced everything they could. We also didn't want to, you take the risk of desensitizing people if you send out too many evacuation orders or too many messages, so we had to be cautious there. But we knew that the weather was coming. We just didn't know how much we would get. So Saturday morning, when I woke up, it was relatively clear outside. I got about a 15, 18-minute commute. I drive in, and then the rain started. So I'm like, all right, not going to be as easy as a day as I thought. The level of the river gauge on the Yantic rose as they predicted, but much slower. And it was following the trajectory to hit their peak, and then it just kind of stalled, if you will. The rain in the initial couple hours of the storm was about a 1/4 inch more than they expected, but then again, that fell off. So the weather god smiled upon us, if you will. If we were, as we got an update later in the morning, if 5 miles south of us in Montville, they got that 3 inches. So Norwich really was fortunate that we stuck to about the 2.1 inches mark on the rainfall total for Saturday. The dam team and the engineers were on site overnight, anticipating the weather, monitoring it. They had reinforced it. They had built the cofferdam, as I'm sure you're aware. They had pumped out the area behind the cofferdam to try to determine where the leak was. And since I said the word, let me talk about that for a second. In one of the interviews that I did with the media, at the end, they asked me, is there anything I'd like to add? And I said, yes, please. I have heard breach, collapse, failure, compromise, and there was one other word, I'm drawing a blank right now, in terms of what happened to the dam on the 2 days of storms. And none of those happened. And as you can imagine, if you pick up a newspaper, or you tune into your favorite news channel, or you hit up something online and you see failure of dam, break of dam, if you have family or yourself in the area, you're going to be worried. From the mouth of the engineer at the site, it's a leak. Not a breach, not a failure. I guess compromise might apply if you want to go that route, but leak was the term that he used. And it's probably important, another lesson learned in terms of getting the message out. Because I don't know that anything that NPU, PIO said once the EOC was activated would have contradicted that. Yet on social media, in newsprint, on the news channels, on TV, and on the radios, we all heard differently. So it's kind of incumbent upon all of us in the EOC and city leadership to make sure that we get a consistent message out that'll inform the community but not panic them. So, sorry, probably lost my thought, but I had to mention that. Again, as they did on Wednesday, the state police staged their swiftwater rescue team and their dive team. This time they staged them along the coast because of some issues on the shoreline. So they were at Camp Net in Niantic, 20-minute ride down the road, but also available and much better than the 90-minute response from Brainerd. As the morning went, our 9 o'clock brief from the Weather Service led to us doing a partial demob around 9:30. We sent some of the less essential people home from the EOC, and we ended up running the EOC with a full demob at 1300. So that's kind of the timeline. Next steps are all over the place. You know, we talked about this in a meeting this afternoon with city manager and other department heads. It's hard to say what the county will qualify for in terms of reimbursement from FEMA. This afternoon, the regional coordinator did release the survey form that was forwarded to department heads and then some. That'll be the way that the region, Region 4, collects their data, determine if New London County meets the threshold for private reimbursement and public assistance. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. You hope for the best. You want enough damage that you qualify, but you don't, because
And it's a short timeline. It has to be in by January 24th, so it's a week from tomorrow. Short time period. Very short, I think.
Yes, sir. In terms of messaging, we learned a little bit in our messaging exercise, if you will. As I said earlier, you know, all our messages now are pre-drafted. If we had something dam related, we're very confident we can get a message out in a matter of 3 minutes as opposed to 30 minutes like we did last time. We worked on having 2 EOC activations within a 72-hour period is good in some ways, because the lessons learned from Wednesday we put into play right away on Saturday morning. A lot of them were on EOC staff. You know, we didn't even have a chance to do a formal after-action review. So it wasn't like as a group we shared anything or talked about stuff. It was just notes that I had taken and some of the discussions that I had with some of the EOC staff and some of the fire departments. So we tried to make some strides on Saturday morning that we necessarily might not have hit the mark on Wednesday morning. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. While I look over my notes, any questions for me?
Sorry, Alderman Bencourt.
I'm going to work in reverse order here. Did the message indicate the potential for a dam failure, the first one you sent out? The text? I know it could
the
be
WIA that
touchy.
was sent out on the 10th was a mandatory evacuation order. It didn't say dam failure. I want to say concerns with the Fitchville Dam. I'm not sure of the verbiage. Chris is
Okay. I'm just curious how you worded that, that's all. I mean, but you did include a mention of the dam.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
And in our
Rest is
draft
semantics.
message for Saturday, if we needed it, we had gone back and forth with that, because here we are, we're going to send a message out, potentially 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And do you want to tell somebody potential? We had potential in one of the drafts, and we said no. And do you want to tell someone failure and then have it not be a failure? Because then you're like, all right, boy who cried wolf.
Crying wolf, right.
So we erred on the side of, we'll take the flack and deal with people afterwards. But if we're sending a message out at 3 o'clock on Saturday morning, it's because we need them to evacuate now.
Okay. Who's the owner of the dam?
It is
Seymour Edelman.
Seymour
Is it
Edelman.
Seymour? Yeah, so,
Yes, sir.
okay. So, yeah, I thought, because there was different things like in the papers that someone about Boswell Light and Power, I'm going, I didn't think that was the case. Okay. This is a little different. If the forecast had been more accurate for the 10th, all right, how would you have done it differently? Or was there anything more to do?
If the forecast on the 10th, if the weather had gone according to the forecast on the 10th, let me put it that way, the EOC probably wouldn't have needed to be activated. It was in moderate flood stage, which, right, wrong, or indifferent, the folks in Yannick are used to dealing with.
I'm just saying if the forecast had been accurate.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, as I said, so that was one of the questions that we asked National Weather Service during one of our briefs on the 13th. As they're talking about the forecast and what they have, I'm like, tell me what the differential was on Wednesday's forecast, because we know there was a big gap. None of us would have said 4 feet, but it was a 4-foot delta between what they had forecast and what we had actually encountered.
I mean, obviously, overall, I think everyone did an outstanding job, really, I think, personally, and I know how stressful these things can be. Everybody was out in the field, running around, I help, service calls, everything else, so I appreciate the effort personally. It's, and I'm on top of a hill, high and dry, so you ain't gotta worry about me. But I'm rooting for global warming, so I want beachfront property. But yeah, right. But, I think you guys, the volunteers, you guys, and everyone else associated with the effort, the PD, everything else, I think did a pretty good job. Obviously, hindsight's 20/20, so, but I think it's important to do those after actions and look for opportunities for improvement, as the saying goes, So, but I certainly appreciate the effort. Thank you.
Thank you for acknowledging that. I will say that the communication and the coordination across all departments was fantastic that morning, both morning and days of the EOC operations. And that was recognized by members in the EOC. It was recognized by members outside of the EOC. So yeah, it was a fantastic coordinated effort.
Why don't I do this? Let's just briefly have Chris come up to talk a little bit about the substation, because we really didn't get into that.
Bean Hill.
And that's another component of the story, so to speak. Probably the one that impacted the most citizens.
5,000.
And unfortunately, I do not have that code, that first code right. I had the second one rescinding the emergency, but I didn't have the first one. Chris LaRose, Norwich Public Utilities General Manager, and I want to go over a little bit about the Norwich Public Utilities response and what we did for the storm. This was a very unique event. Prior to the storm, we were tracking the weather, and we were taking all of our standard pre-storm precautions. We posted all of our pre-storm social media communications and started doing media interviews ahead of the storm. The Yannick River was predicted to peak at a minor level of 8.9 when we were putting our plans together. And we're expecting a significant wind-related storm causing many power outages. Obviously, the forecast was wrong on both accounts. In advance of the storm, we staffed line crews, trees crews, and substation mechanics starting at midnight in advance of the storm. So we were prepared in advance. We also had gas engineers because of the gas regulator station down at Dixie Donuts, which also was inundated in this storm. As we observed rising waters in the Yannick River, we brought in additional personnel to our Bean Hill substation. We had to bring them in on a payloader because there was no way of safely getting people in and out of that substation once the storm started getting high. They were monitoring the situation and kept water away from critical equipment for as long and as safe as practical. During that night, we had minor outages, nothing major, and the only big electrical event other than the substation was at Briar Lane, where we had somebody hit a utility pole, not storm related, just an accident. The river peaked within 7 inches of the historical high. As water began leaking through the sealed walls of the substation, our equipment within the facility was potentially exposed to a catastrophic event. We are closely monitoring this condition Also at the Fitchville Dam, because if that dam were to fail, that would have exacerbated the situation, and we have no idea how high those waters were able to come. We were able to get more information afterwards, but we're assuming in excess of the 500-year flood. And as that water was coming into the substation, a failure where we have water on energized conductors in a substation would have been a catastrophic event. This would have resulted in potentially millions of dollars of damage and months of restoration to get that substation back online. So as we're doing this evaluation, we're looking at the dam in Fitchville. We decided to take the Bean Hill substation offline. Offline, if we did get a complete flood that overcame the station, it would have been a matter of drying out the equipment, not replacing failed equipment. That power outage roughly took out 5,000 customers, and something that I have never seen in my 27 years at NPU. And this was really to make sure the long-term safety and integrity of the facility and our entire electrical system remained intact. So once again, our people were in that substation, and the water was not coming up over walls, it was coming through walls. It was coming through holes, leaks, and things. So they were putting in sandbags, trying to keep it away from the electrical equipment. They started drilling holes in the floor to get the water down to the basement, something we haven't seen in the past. On Saturday, we repeated this same exercise, but additional measures such as channeling and pumping the water more efficiently, the lower flood levels, and the dam was stabilized by the cofferdam, allowed us to maintain power in the substation. This is not something we haven't been thinking about, we haven't done risk analysis on, and we haven't been planning for. In June of 2023, we received a $1.1 million grant from the state of Connecticut to support the planning and design to improve the resiliency at our two critical facilities, the Bean Hill substation and the Shipping Street sewer pump station. $650,000 is planned for the Bean Hill pump station to design measures to protect it from flooding, putting walls, putting additional measures to keep it dry. We're hopeful that this funding will be made available by the state in early 2024. So while we were awarded $1.1 million in June, we haven't received the ability to use and start that planning process yet. That will plan and design the upgraded facility to make it watertight well above the 500-year flood. Now, we also have some concerns about our Deep River water transmission main, which runs adjacent to the Fitchville Dam. During the storm, we're in regular contact with the State Department of Health regarding the potential for a water transmission line failure if that dam were to be compromised. Over the weekend, we updated our emergency procedure plans to prepare potential of operational issues with this water main in light of last week's events. The backup, if we lose the transmission main, we have the Stony Brook Water Treatment Plant. We have a regional interconnect with Groton that is connected at the Mohegan Sun, and we have an emergency well. So 3 things that would help us out if we were to lose that water main. And all of those were exercised, discussed, and planned in case we needed to put them into effect. And the updated plans now have additional steps to enhance public notification. We were not necessarily notifying DEEP if we have a water main failure there. Right now, we know that dam leakage has caused some potential undermining of the pipe, and we're working on getting that remedied, but we can't really dig next to the dam in a compromised position. And we also don't want to cause any harm by disturbing something that's there now. But we're ready to go if we do have an emergency there.
So again, we had a duet going. We had the substation, and then when we got the sinkholes at the transmission main, that became a concern because how it integrated with the dam itself, since it was very close to it, it could have affected the dam structure also. And even doing any kind of repairs now will be very complicated because you're dealing with adjacent dam structure in that sense.
So we're looking at ways to help fortify the bedding of that pipe without doing any major damage to the area. Flowable fill injection is one of the things we are looking at.
Thanks, Chris. And now I have Kevin Brown to come up, and Kevin has taken on the responsibility of being the liaison between, first it was the commercial businesses that were affected by the flooding or just closing because they were isolated and couldn't be opened. And then today, we talk more about residents and what they can do and how they can potentially access funds to assist in their repair. So,
Good. Good evening, everybody. So on Wednesday morning, based on the weather and all that was going on, we just started our own internal assessment, just simply based on the flood zone on the GIS system of what businesses were inside of the floodplain. Started to make individual outreach to those that we immediately already knew, had contact with, had previously worked with. And then at about noon, I checked in with the city manager at the EOC. He informed me there was a map that was, I believe, probably the one that Chief Montoya described, that had begun to sketch out what the impacted area was. So based upon that map and the GIS, we assembled what we thought to be the contact list for the roughly 32 businesses that were inside either the flood zone or that polygon mapped area. And we drafted a very rudimentary first cut data call to reach out to them and ask them just some very basic questions about how the impacts of the flood were affecting them. And those included, do you have business interruption insurance? What is the magnitude of the, and all of these are roughs. I mean, it's very early, but what is your rough estimate of what you believe the building impact costs to be, impact on your inventory of goods or equipment, and impact on your business interruption, your loss of business based upon what's currently ongoing. We framed that up, and then we began to coordinate with DECD. I reached out to the two deputy commissioners because I really had no idea who in our world in the state would have any sort of funding that we might be able to redirect. We asked ourselves internally first, can we redirect ARP? And it was a quick no. We asked ourselves internally, is there a CDBG route that we could go? And the answer was no. And so from there, I thought, all right, I'm going to reach out to the Department of Economic and Community Development. The two deputies redirected me to Sheila Hummel, who some of you may know, has been very supportive here in the region from a DECD standpoint, and she arranged a call between DECD, sector, and ourselves the following morning. Because before we began to promise anything or talk to anyone about what we might be able to do, we wanted to know what actual capital might be available and to what extent. So that conversation was sort of an ongoing staffed conversation throughout the day on Thursday, but what we walked away from the first collaborative meeting telling ourselves was that at least an immediate pivot of the RISE grant monies, which if you're not living inside of this world like I am, that might not resonate with you, but DECD had created a small business grant program called RISE. Sector was one of 5 or 6 different organizations that were charged with getting those grants out on the street. And the obvious, the realization that Sheila and Paul Weitzcarver from Sector had was, this is a pool of money that is intended to help small businesses rise, and it makes sense for us to try to pivot and redirect some of those funds there. What we didn't know then, and what we don't frankly know still yet, is just how many of those dollars are going to come available. But what we purposefully tried to frame this up as is, well, what it's not. It's not a replacement for your insurance coverage, and it's not a replacement for the down the line Small Business Administration or FEMA funds that will come in large scale. And so we very carefully crafted it to be a business recovery micro grant as we try to wrap our heads around what's it intended to do and what is really the max size of these grants. I'm not gonna be on the hook this evening. We just had our last call today at 4 o'clock. We're still not 100% sure. But based upon the initial responses to the data call that we put out, of the 32 businesses we reached out to, we got 12 responses. And those 12 respondents, and anybody else we can still get to between now and tomorrow at 7 o'clock, will come to the Foundry and we will discuss with them how they will be able to apply for this GAP micro grant, just to help them turn the open sign back around, or pay for the costs that it took them to turn the open sign back around, clean the mud out, get a shop vac, have someone come in and do some of the things that were described that were required in some of the facilities. So that's stage one of business assistance at the micro grant level for these businesses. As the city manager alluded to, we, along the way, have been pinging the Small Business Administration through our Connecticut representative, Catherine Marks, who also currently is serving as the regional representative. What that means in this conversation is she has Rhode Island disaster declarations, Connecticut disaster declarations, and there's not just one. So she's managing all of those. In the initial investigation of the Small Business Administration's EIDL program, which you might recognize from COVID, because COVID used a pre-existing EIDL, economic injury disaster loan structure, and pivoted it towards COVID. But that structure exists for floods and fires and all kinds of other disasters. Under that construct, there is a way to qualify not only for businesses, but for nonprofits, homeowners, and renters. And so in today's call at 4:30 with Catherine Marks, we discussed the hows and the whens of that. Now, over the weekend, there was the presidential declaration of a disaster, but that was FEMA-oriented. And what Catherine advised me is that typically the SBA declaration is a few days after that. And then a few days after that, a business recovery center will actually be stood up in the county. Now, I'm pushing for it to be in Norwich, not in New London, because it's this Yantic River floodplain group of folks that are impacted. That's to be determined. And what the actual timing of that is still up in the air. But she shared with me the declaration for a Rhode Island flood disaster that was published on or about the 7th of January, and the disaster loan information and application workshop flyer that they put out, what looks to be about 12 days later, was when they had that business recovery center established, doing face-to-face, point-to-point conversations with anybody impacted. So that's the path that we believe that we're on in terms of the SBA being able to provide definitive information to folks, and again, not just businesses, but nonprofits, homeowners, and renters. That's where we stand today.
So there are a few things that have to happen. We want to try to persuade the powers to be that the center be located in Norwich. It makes common sense that it should be. Most of the flooding and claims were here. There were some in some outlying areas, but mostly to the north. There have not, to my understanding, been substantial claims on the coastline in Connecticut. There was some damages in Rhode Island, but not to the extent here. So it does make sense to have the center located up here, and we'll work hard to make sure that happens. The other thing, as I mentioned before, we have to prepare the estimates on damage caused by the floods, and we have a week to do that. Then if we meet the threshold, and the threshold is a kind of a revolving number, it's not the same each time. Like you get to 2 million, and it's countywide, not just for the city, although the city has, and Basra has bared most of the brunt of this. If it meets the threshold, then FEMA would come down and do a personal audit where they would actually look at the damage or other records that we have, and then make a recommendation to declare it a disaster area, which is then you're eligible for SBA loans and other grants to repair things. We might be able to get funds for the substation, things like that. The dam is a little different. It's not in the city, it's in Basra, and it's also privately owned. So we're gonna have to kind of finesse that. Obviously, the city has a real interest in the health of that dam. Most of the damage that would be caused by a failure of the Fitchville Dam would be in Norwich. So we have a lot of interest in that. So that's going to evolve over the next few days as we get more information. We'll be posting this information on our the city's webpage as well as through NCDC, and also the state will help promote this also. So that's well, we did about a half an hour. It took a little longer to get through this, but our core department heads that were involved in this will continue to work on the estimates at this point, making sure that we can represent the citizens that are in need of funds to make repairs, and then for the businesses to try to assist them in their recovery. Just one example was the mattress facility, which is on, what street is that on the mattress, do you know?
Clint?
Yeah. They lost about $50,000 worth of mattress inventory, so that's substantial. And that's the kind of thing that we've been seeing. So with that, I'll take any questions. We'll be getting back to the city council at every meeting and just letting you know where we are at that. And prior to that, if we have significant events, we'll get a memorandum out to city council so they are prepared if they get constituent calls, which you always do. So you'll be prepared to be able to answer the questions or direct them to the right person that can answer some of the questions. So with that, that completes my report. Questions?
Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. So, my only question is, what about flood-related damage to city roads, bridges, any city-owned property? Did we experience anything of consequence?
Well, the good news is that the answer is no. We did not suffer major infrastructure failures. We have had the time now that the water has dropped to a level where you could look at the bridge abutments and things, and we have no bridge damage. There are some road damages, but most of those are on the state highway through West Townsend, that area. But a lot of debris cleanup, silt, things like that, but nothing major at that point.
Thank you.
I can answer two examples. The parking lot at the former Yannick River Inn destroyed. You probably saw the photos of that. There's a home on Clinton Avenue. They lost every mechanical, furnace, hot water heater, bus bar, electrical. And they have been providing help through the Red Cross. And Kate is working with them to try to extend the Red Cross financial assistance to them until they can get back in their home. A family of 5 adults that was directly impacted.
Yeah, and that's the one that had the immediate shelter.
Yes.
Because their residence was not able to stay in there. Yeah, yes.
Go ahead.
So I would just like to make a request, and this is certainly not very high up on the list, but I'd like to see it completed. I'd like to know where the data comes from that formulates the 500-year flood, because 500 years ago, y- uh, there weren't any non-indigenous people here, and so where are the records? Where did the information come from to say this is how much it's flooded in the last 500 years?
Deanna, why don't you approach Dyers, please?
Deanna's our internal,
I'm actually the city's
Flood person.
floodplain administrator for the city. Unfortunately, I wasn't here last week, and I apologize, but I followed it very closely and was in contact with staff the whole time. So the FEMA comes up, they do all the elevations, and they come up with these projections of where they would consider, they call it a 500-year flood, but what it means is really like the 100-year flood is just that it's a percentage of a chance that it could happen over a year. And the same thing with the 500-year flood. It's really a percentage, the likelihood that it would happen is such a huge flood. Again, historically, I don't know if they have the data that would tell them what 500, but it's such an extreme flooding event. So what's happening is the state of Connecticut, with their grants that they're giving now, it used to be that you had to make sure that you met the 100-year flood criteria, and that's what we locally are in charge of facilitating. We have to make sure with permits if they're in the 100-year, considered the 100-year flood. But we don't have to do anything with the 500-year. But the state is now going to that higher level because they're seeing with so much rain and climate change and other issues that flooding is happening outside those 100-year boundaries, and they're going into the 500-year boundaries. So I wouldn't be surprised if we'll be locally regulating those in the very near future. On a side note, we're part of the community rating system, which is a voluntary program that the city has entered into, and it's a very time-consuming and effort-heavy thing for the city staff to do with tracking all of our permitting and how we do that, as well as having certain trainings and other criteria that we have to meet, and that allows for a certain ranking, and we're to rank number 9, which is average for what we do without having a staff person that's assigned to it full time to do that. What that means is that our 9 ranking, we are allowing, it gets all the residents that want flood insurance a 10% discount on their flood insurance. It's a lot of effort, but we feel that it's worth it, to continue to be able to do that. Every year our CRS is due February 1st, and it's due on February 1st, the reporting, and it's due up to February 1st. So they don't really give you a gap of time to really work on it. I did speak to DEP today, and they are going to ask FEMA to give us a little bit longer time because now we have this incidents that happen that we need to document. So we want to continue to participate. It is, a lot of communities aren't involved in it because it is such an arduous thing to be involved in, but because we have such extreme flood areas in the city and the 3 rivers, I think it's really critical that we continue to participate.
Can I continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, my first question is, do we have the means, or do we know how many cubic units of water is in the Fitchville Pond?
I don't know that, and I don't know if we have that information. I could probably find out if the information's available from DEP.
And as a follow-up to that, I think it would be important to know if that dam were to fail. Now, we talked about this in meetings on Friday. There's a lot of different ways a dam could fail, and that would dictate how the water leaves, right? But if we had a sudden failure of that dam, let's narrow it to that. How many feet of water would be traveling down the Annick River?
Like the volume and the velocity that would be, I can find out if they have that information, and I think that's sort of what Fuss and O'Neill was working on. And do you have that information from Fuss and O'Neill?
we have some of it. They were able to do an emergency inundation plan that would do this. Their private engineering firm did that. And they gave us some direction about what they would be. But as far as velocity, volume, it wasn't there. I did understand that they needed to make calculations on what water was retained in the Fitchville Pond to make the calculation, obviously, because it was all gonna go at once, then you need to calculate how many cubic volume of water. That's when it gets very tricky, because they're all estimates based on programs and that.
So Fuss and O'Neill did provide an inundation map that they produced over the week. From Wednesday to Friday, it got to us late Friday, or excuse me, Friday afternoon is when it got to us.
Yeah.
And we also had one that was provided from the Army Corps of Engineers. They were similar in scope, but they were also both, had the caveat of all bets are off with a dam failure, because you could have debris build up in one choke point that's going to spread the water in a direction that no one anticipated. As the city manager alluded to, the floodplain adjacent to the dam, the floodplain just downstream from the dam in Yantic's district there, right on the edge of town, there's the unknown of how much water is going to disperse, horizontally before it makes its way downriver. And the city manager will attest to something that we all learned when we looked over those inundation maps, and the projected timeline is, it was kind of an eye-opening, a shock, the times projected.
Very surprising, actually.
Yes. They projected a time that I think that all of us in the EOC thought was crazy and generous. We appreciated that much time, of how much time from dam failure, catastrophic dam failure, to water hitting certain points along the river. And it was certainly much longer than any of us anticipated, which, is a bonus, because it gives you, 90 minutes potentially of notification and evacuation time, whereas you might have thought, I got 10 minutes. So to answer the question, I think our Fuss and O'Neill engineers could probably give us an estimate on the volume of water being held back by the dam. They've given us their best estimates on where that path would go. The path of the inundation map for a flood failure was a dam failure was very similar to the 500-year flood map. Very similar. So if you look at it, from a commonsensical approach, geographically, the water's only going to go so far. You're pretty safe up on the hill, whether it's a dam failure or a 100-year flood. So that's why the footprints kind of look the same for both estimates. But we didn't, if they provided it, or if they came up with it, it wasn't shared with us in terms of the volume. Just more likely what would happen, the scenario, the potential scenario with a dam failure.
Yeah, and at this point, we really don't have information on the veracity of the flood, what type of volume would be hitting the Yannick River core. They tell you how much it's going to be flooded, but it doesn't give the scale of the potential damage that can be caused by, freewheeling water just rampaging down the river bed, so to speak.
But even if it's 90 minutes overall, it's the closer you are, the less you have, right? I mean, it's 90 minutes to get to the harbor, right? But, if you're in Norwich town, you don't have 90 minutes.
So one of the things that, a lot of people are talking about is the 100-year and the 500-year flood. But if you look at the flood maps, the most important area is really the floodway. And we haven't really talked about that. That's our areas on the flood maps that are blue and red. They're like hashed. That is the highest velocity area. That's where the river will flow at the fastest rate. The other flooding, the 100-year and the 500-year, we're using those names, that's where the water spreads. That's where it goes and spreads and floods. That floodway is where it's flowing. So keep that in mind. So those are the most dangerous areas. And there is housing and there's businesses and structures in those floodways. And they're there and existing. So it's tricky. It's really tricky. But I just want to let you know when you're looking at the maps to really pay attention to the floodway, because that's where the water is the river. That's the river, basically. It's not the channel of the river. It's what the new channel of the river is. And then the 100 and 500 years. So we had a really large area of river, if you think of it that way, and then flooding.
One last thing.
No, go ahead.
So, because you mentioned insurance, right? And is it, I don't want to make an assumption, is it still true that homeowners policies do not include flood insurance.
So I'm gonna
Because,
answer.
groundwater's not covered. If a pipe breaks in your house, that's one thing, but if water comes in,
So I think that depends on the policy you have, really. But I'm gonna tell you, if you have a mortgage and you're in the 100-year or the floodway, and you have a mortgage, you automatically have to have flood insurance. They require you with your mortgage. If you don't have a mortgage and you're paying with cash or you paid off your mortgage, there's no one there that's saying to you, you have to have this. That's you making a decision personally if you wanna have flood insurance or not. But we allow, with our, being part of CRS, anyone can buy flood insurance in the city and have flood insurance and they can get it discounted. But, a lot of people don't wanna buy that additional policy. But if you have a mortgage and you're in that 100-year or that floodway, your mortgage company is ready to require it because they wanna protect their investment. But other policies, as far as flooding in your basement and stuff, I think it kind of depends on the insurance company that you go with in a particular policy. I don't think it's the general flood insurance policy. It's probably other particular things that you have to
well,
select.
just two thoughts, just so anybody listening or who's gonna watch this, just food for thought for them. The idea that we're getting, stronger, more powerful storms, we're getting a lot more rainfall. We got, 20 inches of rain in 3 weeks? Okay, I had a pond in my side yard that, I had to pump out because it was negatively impacting my property. And so, and I'm 160 feet above mean sea level, so,
Well,
Yeah.
groundwater's everywhere. One other misnomer, and I might as well say it since the public will see it. If you have a 100-year flood, doesn't mean that you're safe for another 100 years. You could have 5 100-year floods in 1 year. And that's people commonly get confused with that. So,
Those chances that we're getting those level of flooding has gone up exponentially.
yeah.
So the things that we once in a while used to have your basement flood is much more frequent now. But as far as insurance, the city itself doesn't, I can't guide you into an insurance policy, but I can give you information about flood, and we do have that information in our office, and it's on the website. And if you look at our emergency management, there's also some information there. So, but our office will take phone calls about where you're at in the flood zone. If you want to know that, if you're not familiar with, if your house is near it, we can help you to explain how to look at the flood maps online and make those determinations.
because it doesn't matter if you're in the floodplain or not, if you get the kind of rain that we've had in the last 3 weeks.
Exactly.
The right series of events happening, you've got a swimming pool in your basement, and, where you
It's
thought,
the topography,
where you never had a problem before.
We have a very, a hilly city, and there's the topography, so you're downstream from just rain coming through the woods and through properties below, You may be very far away from the river, but still have effects from the rain.
Right. That's, we could talk about this all night. I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So on those levels, I can tell you, I was at Domino's a few days after talking to the owner, and building official was also there. And what I learned was the level can go up to kind of 8 feet, because technically all the electrical stuff, according to the building code, needs to be above 8 feet. So I'm assuming that it's in that way that level can go up to 8 feet if the dam fails. But so these are some of the things I think we should consider, because at one point, city, I think, overtook the Nutmeg property. So if we have some funding available, we can also offer relocation of some of the businesses as well. Other thing I just want to mention on the substation in Yantic, I just don't know if sealing that station with the funding which might be available to us is enough or not. But we should definitely look into some of the other options as well. If we have to move that substation to some other location or try to utilize that load to some other substations. So these are some of the important things we need to worry about. And I think this is the time. Pray for the best, prepare for the worst. So we should definitely do that. I'm very happy that NCDC is working on micro grants, because a lot of people are in the need of that. And there's a not just cutting off sheetrock 4 feet and changing outlets. Some of them have lost a lot of resources, and there's a business loss as well. So I don't know how much anyone's insurance covers all that, but these small gestures will go a long way. Uh, but I can tell you one thing. I was there on that day at 9 o'clock. I saw the flow of river going through Domino's and Stop and Shop parking lot and stuff. The flow was alarming, when you see that or you witness that. So, but I was happy all the city departments and everybody, volunteers, everybody worked together. So definitely there was good coordination, and I think we acted just like any city should have acted. So thank you very much for everyone who helped out during that time.
Thank you. Any other questions for the city manager? Alderwoman Sheila Hayes.
Right, so the city manager, and it may be directed to Kevin Brown. He mentioned that that he's received 12 responses of 32 businesses. Is there a concern about the other 20 businesses that have not responded?
Well, I think, we'll be doing that. There'll be an outreach to those. There are some that didn't respond, that may not respond until there's some concrete thing out there. So we anticipate we'll have more.
But I heard him mention there's a meeting tomorrow night to correct me if I'm wrong, if I misunderstood you, that you're gonna give some information.
That's correct.
All right.
And, we'll spend the day tomorrow doing a second, or in some cases, a third outreach. But this isn't a one-shot event. If people can't make it to the meeting tomorrow night, we'll continue to reach out to them.
Okay, so there will still be opportunities, sorry
Yes.
for the fee, opportunities for NCDC or any of the other businesses that have not contacted you to be in contact.
Right.
Okay, after tomorrow night, is there a way to get a list of who attended or who has outreached? Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Just want to do one clarification, just to read to you what they say on FEMA, basically. When they explain a 100-year flood, it's a 1 in 100 chance that it's going to happen in one given year. And that it also refers to a 1% chance of a flood. So that's really when they say it's really 1 in 100. So a 500 is like the 1 in 500 chance that it would happen. But it doesn't mean it can only happen 100 years.
Right,
Does that make
exactly.
sense? So that's really, it's about how many times, but it used to not happen that frequently, so this is why it's more.
It's actually a poor choice of,
It
words
is.
that's over the years that really confuses people.
It does confuse people, because they think that they're safe, like, oh, in 500 years, nothing's gonna happen
Yeah,
here.
you're
But
safe.
it's really a 1 in 500 chance.
That's right.
And, and it happens.
Hey, we're fixing 2 casinos, you wanna play those odds?
Ah,
You know.
exactly.
Excuse me, and I'm barely people. Can I just say one?
Sheila, did
No,
you?
I said that was it, that was my question, I'm finished.
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I'd just like to say thank you to everyone, including folks might be at home or somebody might hear the sound of our voices. All of the response crews, everybody who was involved in dealing with this emergency. From me, thank you. This is a very dangerous situation under very less than ideal circumstances, and certainly one thing that we are not in control of is the weather. But we are in control of how we respond, and overall, I would say that our response was top-notch. So thank you all very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. I'm just gonna add 1 or 2 items. One, I did see that proposed draft of what that once in 500 years looked like, and I'm not gonna begin to try to describe neighborhoods, because I don't wanna frighten people prematurely. But as the chief talked about it, it was really, really something we don't wanna see. The other thing is, my office is, we're reaching out to all the first selectmen along the Yantic River Delta. I'm asking that they come together with us, and we put together a memorandum of understanding between all the communities and towns, and that we start working with our federal legislators. The senators were here on Friday. We spoke that day on site about addressing this holistically and completely throughout the entire Yantic River Delta. I learned something new. I never knew that the Gardner Lake empties into this river delta. I never was aware of that. And there are many other tributaries that supply a flow into this basin. Even the snow runoff was an inflating factor. On Wednesday, some of the towns to our north got as much as 6 inches. Well, all of that came right into the river with it, and maybe that's that other half of inch. I don't know. But we're gonna be working on that for a long time in the foreseeable future, because it's gonna take a long time to come up with a reaction plan that is helpful. The Upper Falls Dam at Uncas Leap, there's discussion, should we take it down, leave it up? I say, if you don't need to hold water back, let it go, take that old dam down. I preside on the public safety measure on that one. Maybe we gotta return to dredging the river. We did that in 82, 83. I was on the council then, and it was Seymour Edelman who dredged the river for us in the Yantic area, the Sherman Street Bridge, which we're now replacing. That clearly needs to be looked at again. Whether we could get permission for that, I don't know. But I think it has to be discussed and put every issue on the table. This cannot be ignored. But it's gonna take a lot of effort, a lot of collective minds in the state, federal level, all have to be brought to bear. I also want to publicly thank Glenn Pianka, First Selectman Bosser, for his cooperation. We were in his town. I felt kind of funny speaking at a press conference in his town when he's standing right there. He was the host. And also thank the governor. The governor came as well that day. So he's aware of everything. Commissioner Dykes, her staff, they were there both days as well.
Our US senators.
Well, yeah, you mentioned that in your minutes here, but I think it's important that we marshal all this effort and run with it until we come up with real long-term solutions to prevent the catastrophic events that could occur. I think that Coffer Dam's gonna keep the dam safe where it is, knock on the wood. But at the same time, that needs to be addressed too. So there were orders of enforcement issued on that 2 years ago. They weren't carried out. This is nothing to be ignored. But, John, thank you very much, and everyone else for staying on such a lousy night. And be careful, it's icing.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you. So that's, the city manager's report, special report for tonight.
Citizen comment on resolution.
I declare citizen comment resolutions open. Invite anyone to address anyone on these 7 resolutions at this time. Please state your name and address for the public record. Anyone wish to speak on citizen comment on resolutions? Anyone wishing to speak on citizen comment on resolutions?
Deanna Rhodes, Director of Planning and Neighborhood Services. I just want to let you know I would like to speak just briefly on number 2 and number 4. Both of these properties are important. They're related to one of them is the Cape Heart, and the other is the property 6A Street, which is adjacent to the Cape Heart. And for plans for moving forward, we have a grant application in at this point to get some funding to do some planning for that property for the future, to do some remediation, clean it up, and make it a benefit to the community in Greenville. So those two, negotiating those properties and getting the property on 6A Street is important to move the area of the city forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak under citizen comment? Anyone under citizen comment at this time? Anyone else under citizen comment at this time? Seeing no one else, I declare it closed. Thank you.
Number 1, relative to city manager being authorized to negotiate a purchase sales agreement for 57 Rock Street.
Motion, please, to bring this to the floor. Alderman Singh, second. Alderwoman Sheila Hayes. Is there discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Alderwoman Hayes. Yes. Alderman Bettencourt.
Yes.
Alderman Singh.
Yes.
President Pro Tem Galusha.
Yes.
Mayor Nyson.
Yes. Thank you. Resolution 1 is adopted 5-0.
Number 2, relative to city manager being authorized to accept the deed in lieu of foreclosure for 6/8.
Motion, please, to bring it to the floor. Alderman Bettencourt, second. Alderwoman Hayes. Is there discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Alderwoman Hayes.
Yes.
Alderman Bettencourt.
Yes.
Alderman Singh.
Yes.
President Pro Tem DeLucia.
Yes.
Mayor Nyson.
Thank you. Resolution 2 is adopted 5-0.
Number 3, relative to amendment of existing American Rescue Plan Act allocation.
Motion, please, to bring it to the floor. Alderwoman Hayes, second. Alderman Singh. Is there discussion?
I got one.
President Pro Tem.
Thank you. So this question for the city manager. So the current, unspent balance for negative economic impacts and household assistance, through human services is almost $500,000.
Correct.
Now that money is allocated, but still unspent. Is that, if that money remains, even though we're reallocating 150,000 of it, so let's say the remaining 300 and change, if that is not spent, are we at risk of losing that money?
Well, it originally was going for basic support related to COVID, COVID aspects of unemployment, things like that. So we're gonna have to make some decisions in the next 6 months or so, whether we want to reallocate more of it, as there's less of a need for COVID-related recovery. So we certainly want to try to reallocate that before the funds are voided and have to go back.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, roll call.
Alderwoman Hayes. Yes. Alderman Bettencourt.
Yes.
Alderman Singh.
Yes.
President Pro Tem DeLucia.
Yes?
Mayor Nyson.
Yes. Thank you. Resolution 3 is adopted 5-0.
Number 4, relative to negotiate the acquisition of property located at 5th Street, end of canal.
Motion to bring it to the floor, please. Alderwoman Hayes, second. Alderman Singh. Is there discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Alderwoman Hayes.
Yes.
Alderman Bettencourt.
Yes.
Alderman Singh.
Yes.
President Pro Tem DeLucia.
Yes?
Mayor Nyson.
Yes. Thank you. Resolution 4 is adopted 5-0.
Number 5, relative to H. Tucker Braddock Jr. be reappointed to Harbor Management Commission.
Motion, please, the floor. Alderman Singh, second. Alderwoman Hayes. Is there discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Alderwoman Hayes.
Yes.
Alderman Bettencourt.
Yes.
Alderman Singh. President Pro Tem DeLucia. Mayor Nyson.
Yes. Thank you. Resolution is adopted 5-0.
One more. Wait.
We can do 6.
Yeah. We're pausing in between 6 and 7.
Relative to appointing the accounting firm of Clifton Larson Allen LLP to perform the regular general audit.
Motion to the floor. Alderwoman Hayes, second. Alderman Bettencourt. Is there discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Alderwoman Hayes. Yes. Alderman Bettencourt.
Yes.
Alderman Singh.
Yes.
President Pro Tem DeLucia.
Yes?
Mayor Nyson.
Yes. Thank you. Resolution 6 is adopted 5-0. President Pro Tem.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move pursuant to Connecticut General Statute 1-200 subsection 6, that the members of the Norwich City Council go into executive session for the purpose of discussing the acquisition or disposition of real estate or interests in real estate when publicity regarding the proposed acquisition or disposition would cause a likelihood of an increased price to acquire and a diminished price to dispose of the property, and to review feasibility evaluations and reports made for the city of Norwich regarding such property, and to review information given the city in confidence not required to be disclosed by law. City Manager John Salamone, Comptroller Joshua Pothier, President of the Norwich Community Development Corporation Kevin Brown, and Corporation Counsel Michael Driscoll shall be asked to participate during all or portions of this executive session at the request of the City Council.
Thank you. Is there a second? Alderman Singh. Roll call, please.
Alderwoman Hayes,
Yes.
Alderman Benford,
Yes.
Alderman Singh,
Yes.
President Pro Tem DeLucia,
Yes.
Mayor Nystrom.
Yes. Motion to go in executive session passes 5-0. 319, please. Council, come back to order. Let the public record show there were no votes taken. A motion to return. Alderman Singh, second Alderwoman Hayes. Roll call.
Alderwoman Hayes,
Yes.
Alderman Benford,
Yes.
Alderman Singh,
Yes.
President Pro Tem DeLucia,
Yes.
Mayor Nystrom.
Thank you. The motion passes 5-0. We're back in.
Number 7, relative to extending the purchase of Oxhill Land LLC until April 30th, 2024.
Motion, please, to bring to the floor. Alderman Singh, second Alderwoman Hayes. Is there discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Alderwoman Hayes,
Yes.
Alderman Benford,
Yes.
Alderman Singh,
Yes.
President Pro Tem DeLucia,
Yes.
Mayor Nystrom.
Yes. Thank you. Resolution 7 is adopted 5-0. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned by Alderman Bettencourt, second by Alderman Singh. Roll call.
Alderwoman Hayes,
Yes.
Alderman Benford,
Yes.
Alderman Singh, President Pro Tem DeLucia,
Yes.
Mayor Nystrom.
Yes. Motion to adjourn passes 5-0. Good night. Drive safe.